All right, everyone, I'm back. Are you awake? Can we do this one more time? You know, right after me. Fired up. Fired up. Fired up. And ready to create change in environmental justice as well as climate justice. Are you ready? We have the fabulous, all the way live from Oakland. This young lady, she's smiling, she looks very gorgeous there, but this young lady's name is Crystal Young. She's gonna be talking on energy, democracy, examples nationwide. Can we give her an absolute applause? Just everything, give it to her, because she's gonna give you the information that you need to be able to make change. Now I'm done.
All right, thank you. It might help if I can see the group instead of the podium. But I'm here talking about energy democracy, two words that is generally a combination of two very boring words to most people. Energy, a lot of people don't understand what energy means, and a lot of people don't understand what democracy means or have very little hope for democracy. So I want to start by kind of have all of you think about energy and think about the graphic of what energy means to you, and wonder how many of you actually have the image of a light bulb or a lightning bolt in your head when you think about energy. I mean, I do, but when we start thinking about this a little more, we start to realize how much energy really dictates our life. It determines how we woke up, how we got information in the morning, how we got here, how we got our food and water, and sometimes how we even connect with our loved ones. Energy is really important, and I'm not really here to talk about what energy sector is going to make an important piece of climate justice at all. I mean, we all know that, and I'm here really to talk about what energy really means to all of us, beyond just the fact that we need energy, and it's a very vital resource. In the society with economic model that depends on the flow of energy, our energy crisis that we're seeing today is also equate to our economic crisis caused by the quest for increased accumulation of capital and exploitation of people. So I'm here to share with you the picture of building solution by changing the narrative from climate change being a climate crisis to climate change being economic crisis. So really just how can you connect the dots and really see the full picture, and how different groups, when they connect the dots, they are building something a lot much bigger than changing the energy industry, going away from fossil fuel into renewable energy. It's really about how we actually change the economic system from fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy. This is a lot more than just the fuel source. So when we're expanding the idea of climate action to energy democracy, can you hear me well? I see concerns on Marie's face.
Having technical difficulties. We can hear you.
Okay.
Keep talking, Crystal. Yeah. They can hear you well.
Okay, great. Okay. Great. So, well, I could just go on to the next slide. So I want to start by doing this by sharing with you the stories captured in the Energy Democracy National Tour that is currently happening. And it is being organized by the Local Clean Energy Alliance that connects local communities who are taking back control of energy to work that contribute to building a national energy democracy movement. And this is something that's already been happening across the country, and Local Clean Energy Alliance is working with many different local communities who are also doing that. This is not about us going around evangelizing this idea. It's about the fact that people are already doing it without recognizing that we are part of a bigger movement. So the story in this tour describe a diverse perspective of what that movement means. And the access to energy or clean energy should not be a privilege. It should be a human right controlled by our communities who depend on it, because when communities have control of energy, which you will see, they tend to use it to address the environmental, economic, and social crises we're facing. That's listing from poverty, unemployment, inequality, and displacement, deportation, militarization, sharp cuts in health, education, and other services. So we can really see how by taking back control of energy, it's not just about climate solution, but it's really connecting the dots for many things. And it is communities, especially low-income communities and communities of color, taking into their own hands that responsibility to build a cleaner and more equitable future. And this is when we see that democracy is not just about voting once in a while, it's about participating. So I want to start by kind of showcasing you the map that we have on our website, which is energydemocracy.us. The inaugural Energy Democracy Tour highlights that alternative, frontline-led, and justice-centered effort to dismantle the extractive fossil fuel economy across the country. And it is a series of events hosted by local organizations across the country to highlight and advance the local work they're doing that contributes to the national energy democracy movement. And so it's a tour, just want to clarify that it's not a tour where people are traveling around, it's a tour of the concept of energy democracy by working with local organizations who are already doing the work to set a notion of what the future needs to look like. And so using this map, we could show that for the shift to renewable energy source to have real significance, it must also means the shift from large-scale centralized energy development to a community-based decentralized energy system where energy resources are controlled by our communities. So I'll start by talking about where I am in California. And in California, we have Oxnard as an example, which is really not very unique across the country. So Oxnard, for those who don't know, is a low-income, predominantly not Latino, farm working and agricultural processing community on the central coast of California. It is a home to 3 power plants. You can see one that's in the background of this photo, a Superfund toxic waste site, landfills, and among the highest level of agricultural pesticide exposure in California. It's also in the 90th percentile for asthma rates in California as well. And why am I telling you this story? It's the fact that there's a sacrifice zone across the country for communities, especially low-income communities and communities of color, to live in these areas. They call it sacrifice zone, just so the rest of the country can prosper. And these organizations or these communities are starting to organize and fighting back and say that we need to build power within our own communities for people to really start to pay attention to our lives. And this story is basically talking about how in California, groups are gathering together to start creating environmental justice policy. So this picture is of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, where they organize around the state of California to create state policy framework to move financial and technical resource into historically disadvantaged or overburdened communities in areas most impacted by industrial pollution like Oxnard here. So these communities are sites for developing decentralized renewable energy projects and other new resources. So here's some notes if you're interested in looking at their 5 strategies for policy. It's obviously first, it's displacing fossil fuels as soon as possible. You can see this picture is really their victory party to shut down the NRG gas power plant in their backyard, and then strengthening the air regulations so then they actually can make sure that the health of their community is being taken care of by the law in the state. And then creating public investment and prioritization of community-owned energy resiliency systems. So that is also being owned by the community or by the public. It's not privatization where groups will focus on profit over people. And more importantly, they also push to create a state wildfire relief fund, because most of the time when disaster hits, the groups that's actually taking the biggest hit are the migrant workers and immigrant families who are not being protected by our federal law. And through all of this, to advance a fast as well as intentional just transition to 100% renewable energy economy that prioritizes the disadvantaged community and labor. And at the same time, this is not just in California. In Portland, Oregon, they're also currently having one similar policy that is taking 1% of the billion-dollar businesses that's in Portland to reinvest into this thing called the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and it's currently on the ballot in November. It is an opportunity to invest into making Portland a cleaner and more equitable future, and it is the first ballot in Oregon that is being led by the communities of color to push to invest into their own group. So speaking for themselves is an extremely important characteristic in terms of environmental justice policy, because unless you really understand what they're experiencing, it's really hard to really design something that works for them. So that's California and a little bit of Portland in terms of energy. So now let's travel down to the South. A lot of people don't think there's very much happening in a primarily Republican states, but in the South, we have this thing called the Rural Electric Cooperatives. So rural electric cooperatives, who for those of you who don't know, it was built in the 30s as part of the war on poverty. It became an economic necessity to bring electricity to rural America. And in the South, right here, we have One Voice in Jackson, Mississippi. The story focuses on organizing work taking place in rural Southern communities to reclaim community ownership of existing energy cooperatives. So the rural electric cooperatives generally, because it was built back in the 30s, it was built based off of the white power structure. And if you look at the board of the cooperative right now, they're all white people supplying electricity in a predominantly African-American and disenfranchised community in Jackson, Mississippi. And when they're doing that, obviously there's a high level of corruption and injustice that's happening. Obviously, the communities don't understand that they are a part of a cooperative. They think that it's a big corporation they're just buying electricity from. In Jackson, Mississippi, we're talking about communities, on average, they spend about 40% of their household income just on electricity alone. And now if you think about the fact that they have to choose between that and then paying for rent, medical bill, education, it's a very hard decision for them to be able to survive, to even get heat or air conditioning in the summer and heat in the cold winter. So the rural electric cooperatives are key to an economic revitalization of low-income communities in the South back in the days to make sure that there's electrification. But what they're now doing is One Voice is organizing communities who are facing the issues of poverty to basically start to realize that they can take back control and implement this work to truly revitalize the low-income communities to transform this tool as a rural electric cooperative into an authentic community-owned and controlled energy service provider. So it is currently an ongoing fight about white power structure placed in a primarily African-American community as well as disenfranchised community. The board election is happening in the fall, and it will be pivotal to show the result of democratic organization to take back control of their local energy. And it is not just unique in Jackson, Mississippi. It's happening all across the South, that communities are now waking up and realizing they actually own this cooperative system and they can actually work together and leverage the democratic control to participate and take back issue. And right now you can think, well, what are the progress right now? So back in July, when we had a tour stop there in Jackson, Mississippi, we were planning to have about 20 community leaders to show up and strategize around the election and how to organize their own communities. We ended up having 200 people showing up. And that was like a very last minute chaos that happened for us. And people asked, like, why are there so many people showing up very last minute? It was because as communities are being organized, the cooperative that's very corrupted started to freak out. And they know that as a normal cooperatives, you know that you would give out at least dividend checks to the member or some sort of participation that was apparently not being given out for the last 50 or more years. So they started to issue dividend checks for the first time to parents and grandparents who were already dead. And so these communities are then starting to realize, well, what do I do with these checks to my relatives that no longer exist? What can I do with this hundreds of dollars? And as they're looking into this, they also realize that in a white community, the dividends check that they're getting is actually thousands of dollars. It's by at least 10 times difference. So you can see the corruption that is happening within these rural electric cooperatives that was implemented with goodwill, but not with the right people being participating. And now people are coming together and taking back control. So we can now travel up to the northeast area. We have this thing, it's a new model of electric cooperative as a way to create economic development. So it's a little different from the rural electric cooperative, where rural electric cooperative in the South actually owns the poles, wires, and generation plants, as well as transmission line. But the new energy cooperative is simply providing different energy product and service as compared to this traditional model. So what they do is basically, unlike traditional electric cooperatives that only service its own members, here example is a co-op power. They represent an alternative economic development model for advancing a new renewable energy economy. So what they do is they highlight economic, social, and environmental benefit being made available to low-income communities through these new cooperatives. Every time they have any profit or benefit, they can actually then reinvest into the community. So people can join together to form cooperative. And I'm talking about in the Northeast, it's a community of people who are used to the concept of barn raising. When they come together, crowdfund, and start to create some of a community asset. So they use a similar culture that's happening in the Northeast and New York to then create cooperative that can meet their common needs. Because the law honors cooperative as a way for people to work together. It's just a history of that region. Cooperatives are not taxed both at the corporate level and not at an individual level, just only at one and another. So it is creating a lot of opportunity for groups to really leverage this structure to actually reinvest into their own community. So as a cooperative generate revenue, the return they cash to local vendors and employees and can pass back the profit to their consumers as well. So this non-extractive financial model helps community-based organizations to remain resilient to market shift and continue to provide stable service and jobs in their own community. So now going back to California, again, one of the really exciting things that's recently happened, it's the Community Choice Energy Program, which you actually have in, I believe, Boulder, Colorado as well. It's basically an alternative public agency to a local investor-owned utility. For you guys will be equivalent to Xcel Energy. So a Community Choice Energy Program is a opportunity for groups to start their own nonprofit as a way to provide an alternative to investor-owned utility. But most of the Community Choice Energy Program don't really focus on the word community. They sometimes call it CCA or CCE. And for Local Clean Energy Alliance and East Bay Clean Power Alliance that's been pushing this for a decade, they really want to focus on the fact that community engagement is key. And so we, in the East Bay, for the first time, we're finally creating a Community Choice Energy Program that is truly created by the community to reach its potential. It is different from other Community Choice Energy Program that you might know for three reasons. One, it is actually being pushed forward by the community. Two, it was launched with a genuine roadmap with commitment to local development of energy resources. Most Community Choice Energy Programs launched by buying renewable energy from the grid. So in the case for California, a lot of times you just end up buying renewable energy from Nevada or from Wisconsin, which you have cheaper clean energy, but you're then displacing the jobs and clean energy job opportunity away from California. So what East Bay Community Energy did was that it was launched with this local development business plan to commit to clean energy jobs with a roadmap to make sure that they're actually creating jobs right here in Alameda County where the East Bay Community Energy is servicing. And the third thing that's exciting about the East Bay Community Choice Energy Program is that it actually has a governing structure that is centered around community say. So on the board for the East Bay Community Energy, there's 11 board seats that is seated by the 11 cities in the Alameda County, elective members to basically speak for their own city. And then one of the seat is also by the Community Advisory Committee that is seated by 12 different community members from across the county that comprises of labor unions, activists, as well as just businesses who would benefit from cheaper or better electricity rates. And so it is designed in a way that there is actually real power from the community to actually say something for this alternative renewable energy, not just renewable energy resources, but a energy service provider. And this will, just to think about the impact of this East Bay Community Energy, is that it services 1.5 million people in the county. So this story is exciting because it's about how people from different backgrounds, talking about labor, environmental activists, policymakers, coming together to stand up to the investor-owned utility, to create an alternative public service agency. And the collaboration comprises of broad working class alliance. And one exciting story that I'd like to share here is one of the biggest ally, who's also the president of the Community Advisory Committee, is the California Nurses Association. You would think, like, why do nurses care about clean energy or community choice energy program for that matter? Wouldn't they be more focused on the fight for Medi-Cal for all, which they do? And for them, it was because one of the executive level person from the nurses union works at the Children's Hospital in Oakland. And she gets so sick of seeing children coming in with asthma and lung cancer, and a lot of times died. And she could not just constantly be taking care of them only. And she really wants to find out the root cause and find out that the power plant and the industry pollution in Oakland, as well as Richmond, is the main issue. So they realize that they really need to create a better alternative to the fossil fuel industry that we're seeing. So then they end up being a leader into pushing a community choice energy program that puts community at the front and center of this development, and also addressing the questions of historic discrimination to create a new energy model that generates community-based energy, especially in the generally disenfranchised community. So it highlights community scale solar over individual rooftop solar projects. One of the bigger partner organization is just really about changing the concept of people being consumer and producer to partners, where you can create bigger solar arrays than you're currently consuming without the community solar policy that you currently have in Colorado. In California, we don't have a community solar program that people can actually come together and put bigger projects. So through this community choice energy program, with an innovative commitment to create local development, we are actually on a path of making that happen without state policy devoted into making sure this could happen. So now we talk, like, kind of just travel across the country, looking at different model, but across the country and even across the world, there is actually a big movement that's happening in the labor movement. A lot of times when we're having this conversation about green jobs, you tend to then very easily fall into this tension between energy sector workers, who are obviously really about fossil fuel economy, the current energy from pipeline worker to electric line workers. They're one of the biggest resistance or biggest tool that fossil fuel economy is using to resist any transition into renewable energy. So what Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, it's an international union alliance organization, what they're doing is basically changing the concept away from just renewable energy versus fossil fuel. It's basically talking about how can we talk about the problem not being fossil fuel as a fuel source, but really about extractive fossil fuel economy. And what that looks like is it includes private accumulation of wealth. It includes exploitation of labor as well as our planet. It also includes the power and income disparity. So this is not just about pollution and carbon. This is about everything that is connected. And how can we actually transform the entire economy into a renewable energy economy? And Trade Union for Energy Democracy brings together different trade unions not just in the energy sector, but from a variety of different sectors, from nurses, firefighters, to auto worker, to communication worker, to basically come together and basically talk about the fact that even if you're not living in polluted area, even if you're not working in a specific energy area, we are all, as working class, people who are working, we are all victims of this extractive economy that is taking advantage of workers. Nurses could feel it, not just by being at the front line of taking care of the sick people, but nurses could also feel it by the fact that we are having severe, sharp cuts in public health care. Same thing with teachers. Teachers are protesting across the country because we are having a sharp cut in education because of our system is currently moving towards a high privatization of public goods. So the energy crisis and failing of the extractive fossil fuel economy is affecting more than just labor in the energy sector, is basically what this narrative is trying to say, is that when we are bringing together trade unions from all sectors, we can then collaboratively identify and advocate for the new energy system and economy that we all need, one that takes the climate science seriously and advances social science, and that ensures a just transition and good union job. And they want to also make it very clear that just transition is not just a one-to-one transition from coal miners to solar installer. It's not about green jobs. It's about just transition to the new economy where we're actually putting people at the center of the institution instead of just institution that is focusing on profit only. So I want to kind of just wrap this rant off with just kind of framing climate action. When we look at climate action, we tend to look at things in a decarbonization way. And I want to invite everyone to start looking at climate action, not just about climate, but it's about democracy. It's about economy. It's about how we can actually build energy democracy as a strategy to realize a just transition to this new renewable energy economy. So when we're looking at the entire map, we see so many different strategy across the country, from policy to rural electric cooperative, taking back control of that piece, and all the way to creating new cooperatives, and then creating a community choice energy program, or even just organizing cross-sector with different labors to come together and really strategize a way forward. They're very diverse, but they're all united by a common commitment to local controlled and owned energy resource for the benefit of their own community, including addressing urgent environmental, economic, and social crises we're all facing. And that is the list on the right-hand side of this slide here. And just want to wrap this up and basically say that climate justice is social justice. It's not about decarbonizing the economy, it's about decolonizing the economy. Communities are taking back control of energy, literally, politically, and economically, to build energy democracy. So every time when you're hearing about 100% renewable energy, this is when I want to challenge you to start asking whoever says anything about 100% renewable energy is then you ask them, owned by whom? Because the most important question is, when there's so many solutions out there, including geoengineering and carbon pricing and taxing, when you're really looking at is what solutions are real solutions. It's not about fighting fuel, but it's about creating a new economic model so we can all survive and prosper. But if you're actually privatizing everything and things that are actually human rights, such as energy, our water, our air, and our housing, then we are actually not really taking care of the people. So in essence, the stories that you're hearing so far is in our collectivity in the energy democracy, depicting a growing kinship and unity between climate justice and other movements for human, civil, worker, immigration, and democratic rights. So in conclusion, I forgot to mention that this Energy Democracy National Tour is inspired by the Energy Democracy book that just came out at the end of last year, that is written by 10 different organizations across the country. Most of them are featured in the story that I just shared with you, to basically showcase the work that they're all doing, all the way from community organizing to leadership capacity development, to movement building, to policy making, all the way down to demonstration project of seeing how we can actually make it work financially and technically. And in the book, one of the main co-editor, Dr. Denise Fairchild, would say is that the movement to democratize energy and dismantle the fossil fuel economy is very similar to the movement to dismantle the slavery economy. And it needs every single one of us to be part of this movement. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Crystal, thanks so much. So anybody who wants to ask Crystal a question, the best way to do it is going to be to come up here and just look at the computer, and she'll be able to see you, and you can ask a question. But in the meantime, and Crystal, I hope you can you hear me too?
Yep.
Okay, great. So just a couple kind of information for Colorado. Crystal talked about CCAs, or community choice aggregation. That would have to be approved by our legislature. So we have a monopoly system in Colorado, and in order to change that, that would have to be allowed. It's allowed in 7 states. And what Crystal's referring to in Boulder is in Boulder, the community decided that Excel really wasn't moving to renewables nearly as fast as they wanted to. And in order to get there faster, they said, you know, hey, we should own this. Also, we're all familiar with roads. You know, roads are kind of a utility too, and we pay and also allow for a profit for those to be built and maintained too, but they're owned by the people. They're owned by the public in the end, not the person who built it gets to extract rent on that, you know, forever. So what Crystal is explaining is there really are different models, and different models are being pursued in different parts of the country. And, you know, in Colorado, we have a model where Excel serves about 1/3 of the state, I think geographically, but they extract $500 million in profit every year, and that has doubled that over the last decade. So, you know, they may say they don't have money for renewable energy, but, you know, it's because it's structured, and most Fortune 500 Wall Street traded firms are structured to deliver maximum profits for the stockholders. So that's, you know, that is what we have right now. But we have also had very big victories. And Colorado Interfaith Power and Light, which is one of the co-sponsors, was very active, along with Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate and others. We're still trying to get Excel to commit to close all of the coal plants by 2030. We want to see a schedule this year for them to close the coal plants by 2030. And I just want to mention that you could write down this address right now, Board of Directors at Excel, that's starting with an X, excelenergy.com. This is not voting. You can email them every week and say, we are ready for 100% clean energy. They're not going to be very amenable to the energy democracy argument. You know, they like this, they like their deal, but at least you can tell them we want clean energy, and it's very, very helpful. Crystal, thank you for exposing us to these other models. Another thing that we need in Colorado, and we did have a step last year, was the ability to store energy. You know, obviously the utility doesn't want us to share energy. They don't want us to be able to sell it to each other or share it with our neighbors or share it in a shopping center. So, you know, these are all steps that need to be made basically legislatively. But to Excel, we can say, hey, we're ready now. And I want to thank David Cockrell and the Sierra Club for, you know, being really at the forefront of this effort in Colorado, you know, on the energy transition. So does anyone have questions for Crystal? Yes, Colleen. Here, you can just, it might be easier to speak there.
Hi, Crystal. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I have a question regarding California and public banking, which would enable all of the organizations that you mentioned to have a better opportunity to afford the changes that you would like to see in energy. And I know that California right now has something, I don't know if it's on the ballot, for approval of public banking in the state of California. Can you answer that, or do you have any knowledge of that?
What I understand is different cities are pushing for public banking. I don't think that's a state level or even county level thing, but that's my understanding. And yes, there's starting to have a lot of conversations around creating public banking. And I love the fact that you mentioned public banking, because what's important about energy democracy is not the energy part, it's the democracy part, and how we need to take back control of a lot of things, including our financial resources, and how we can all come together and create public agency for all the things that's important to us, including banking. And this whole notion of energy democracy is a struggle against privatization that is the result of extractive fossil fuel economy. And in order for us to push for a place that we can actually create more common good, things like public banking is extremely important. And that conversation is definitely happening. And I'm not currently aware of any public bank that actually exists in California, but that might just be my lack of understanding. I know that every time in Oakland, we talk about public banks in Oakland, we use Germany as an example. So by that, I'm just assuming that we don't have one that exists just yet in California.
I guess co-ops are the most democratic form of government, but wondering about the role of benefit corporations, B Corps. I think Green Mountain Energy may be one.
Yes, we have co-ops. There's Green Mountain and public banking. I don't know if we have any examples yet, but there will be a bill in the legislature this year, and there's a lot of hope that we're moving that direction in Colorado. Did you have a question too? I did. Did you?
Thank you for your educating us. Cooperatives, obviously, to me, are extremely important. But how do you prevent cooperatives from becoming centralized and corrupt? That's a question. How do you? I've been involved in cooperatives for 30, 40 years. They're great, but people can become lazy, bad behaviors, centralization of power. How do you prevent that from happening?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's actually kind of, you already see it in the rural electric cooperative as an example, that the power was centralized in the board. And in fact, most people who are part of this cooperative don't even know that they're part of it. Also, in some way, probably by choice, but for the most part, it's probably by the system design. And the only way to make it work is really community organizing. And that's how you can get democracy, is engagement. And how we can actually create a future we want to see is participation from everyone as much as possible. It took me, I've been trying to figure out what is the best way it's an easy way to describe what energy democracy means. And one way I look at it is that energy should not be looked at as a commodity like sugar or gold that we could trade. Energy should be looked at as a common good that is a human right that everyone should have access to. And democracy means that we're now looking at people as a consumer, where we can just be lazy and lay back, but how can we look at people as citizens and participants? So this is an important cultural shift that we all need to do. We all need to take responsibility in our own hands to actually participate as much as possible in order to make this model work. Otherwise, there's a reason why a capitalistic, highly efficient system is in power right now, is because it can allow us to be lazy, because we kind of make the decision collectively as humanity to choose to allow this extractive fossil fuel economy to work for us, so then we don't have to think about all these things, so we can just sit back and watch TV and have conversation and just and take photos of food and whatnot, but not really participate with each other because we choose to. So in order for energy democracy work, which obviously a lot of people will probably argue how unrealistic it is, just like how people will argue that a renewable energy and equitable model is unrealistic. But if it's really about humanity at stake in our existence as a species, then really should take in our own responsibility to work with each other, to participate in the environment that we live in order to truly achieve democracy. And again, it's not about voting once in a while, it's about community engagement. I hope that really answered your question. It's a shift in mindset, not just about legal model.
Thanks, Crystal.